Hey friends, welcome back to the Bald Booktuber. My name is Scott. Once again, we have Christopher Ruocchio with us, author of Sun Eater, including the upcoming Disquiet Gods, which we are all very, very excited about. So, Christopher, thanks for being here, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. Sword of the Lictor is, I think, my favorite of the bunch, so this will be fun.
Nice. I'm on the fence. I think I might slightly still prefer Claw a little bit more, but I really enjoyed this as well. And everything has been 5 stars so far, so that is I can't complain. So
Yeah,
that is
lots of relief.
I it is very nice to have someone who knows what's going on to help me here. I grabbed a book by Michael Andre Driussi.
Driussi, yeah, Andre
Yeah,
Driussi.
he does the lexicon, but also he did this kind of chapter by chapter breakdown, and that helped me a little bit on this read through, which is good. So anybody thinking about getting that should get it. It is pretty useful. Some of the stuff I still am not well read enough to understand, but some of it helps. So that
Well, I have the attitude that you're never going to really get everything out of this unless you're willing to commit, to the degree that Andre Driussi does, or
Mhm.
or someone like Mark Armini or something. Like those guys know everything, but I do not, and I've said before, like I am like a journeyman Wolf fan. I am not a master
Yeah,
Wolf fan, and that's sort of like fine,
yeah,
right? Because these books, we've said, I think every episode, like they have this reputation for being really difficult, and that puts people off, and it's
sure.
probably ghettoize them as a cult classic, but
Yeah,
that shouldn't put people off, right? They are like they are difficult, but they are
mhm.
also like fun, and I think
Yeah,
that anybody who likes Tolkien, or especially if you like Tolkien and like Jack Vance, like you'll be right at home. But I think normal fantasy readers who get along with things like Wheel of Time or Malazan can totally like get into this. It's a different like writing style. It's a different kind
for
of
sure.
world, but it's like not inaccessible, right? I think
Yeah, I
the
agree.
people who say it's too tough, or you know, I don't know. I just think they're wrong. So
Yeah, I one thing I for sure am going to do is read Undying Earth by Vance at some point because, especially like this Driussi guy, consistently talks about all of the echoes of Vance's work, which is pretty cool.
yeah,
So,
no, Vance was to Wolf in these books sort of what Wolf was to me with Sun Eater, right?
mhm,
He's clearly trying to do his own thing, right? Like I obviously have a lot of New Sun references in Sun Eater
sure.
specifically. It's one of the books that I'm most in dialogue with, but I'm not Gene Wolfe, right? I don't have the same experiences. I was not in Korea, for example,
Sure.
and I can't remember who I was talking to. Was talking about how there was, I think, a book about Wolf, or rather, or maybe it was a book of his letters home when he was in the Korean War,
Hmm.
and that his sort of obscure style of writing might have been, sort of an offshoot of the way he wrote these letters to his mother, where he was trying to tell her what he was going through, but
Hmm.
like didn't want to tell her too directly because it was
Yeah,
awful. And you can kind of see how that mechanism informs the writing style generally. That's like not something that I relate to, but
right.
Wolf is also not Jack Vance. He's a very different writer,
For,
and but he wanted to play with the same toolkit, and
mhm.
that is what it's all about, right? So
Yeah.
so Vance is another one. Vance is one I'm not as well versed on,
Mhm.
but like he's a blast. So
I'll get to it. It's on the list, so I can only do so many things at
yeah,
a time.
no, no,
Get to
yeah, me too. I'm a much slower reader than you are, believe me. So.
it.
Um,
Well, I don't know. You tend to avoid the newer stuff, and I have to do the newer stuff and the older stuff. So
yeah, yeah.
a little bit of that.
Yeah,
So
I am lazy, but also like very particular. So I've been listening to Empire of Silence again,
yeah,
because it's like time, right? I
yeah.
like really need to brush up, and it's taken me like weeks, partially because that's my own writing, and I'm like, ooh, I could have done that paragraph better. Like time to stop for now, which is not, it's hard, reviewing your own stuff, but it's
I
been
imagine it would be. Yeah,
been slowing
I
down.
loved Empire Silence the first time, but I liked it even more the second time around after I'd read everything to that point. But yeah, I think that's how I would be too. If I'd written something, I'd be like, well, I don't like the way I phrased this or that. Could have been different. Like I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, because some of what's in it is coming up on 10 years old for me, right? Like
Yep.
I wrote especially like the beginning parts of Empire when I was, yeah, when I was like 18, 19. So it is, it's not up to 29-year-old me standard, right? So I'm having a fun time listening to it. Um,
But
but
that's part of the appeal of reading stuff in order, because the author grows as the reader
oh,
grows.
sure, yeah, no, so yeah, brought it back around, Scott. Well played.
Yeah, I did. Yeah,
Uh, Publication order always, except with
that's
Lois Bujold. Um,
I'll have to take your word for that one. When I get
yeah.
to it, I'll do it in the order you say is the right way to do it. So.
Yeah, she just like wrote that story, that like that series, just in whatever order she felt like. It's bizarre, but I digress. I digress. We should probably talk about Gene
Yeah,
at some point before we
we should.
scare Stewart and CWK here off. So
That's right. Yeah. So it's interesting. I really like the description of Thrax as a city. I thought it was very gothic, very kind of cool.
oh
With
yeah,
the what was it? The most affluent people lived closest to the bottom of it, and the least affluent were kind of at the top, the furthest away from the water source. Like some of that world building, I thought was really cool. And at the start, he is the lictor of the, what is it? The
Vincula, yeah.
Vincula. Yeah. So he's sort of a bit where he was supposed to be after his exile, right? He's gotten to the place that he was assigned.
Yeah.
Uh,
So he's the sort of chief headsman and the guy who runs the jail.
right.
So he's like Brian Lee Durfee. You know. Just kidding.
What a reference.
But yeah, no. So he's, you know, he's living it up. Did you notice too that like Thrax is it's a hydroelectric dam,
Hmm.
right? Like yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's one of those details, right? That's just really fun.
Yeah.
You know, because he never comes out and says that, but in the same way that the Madachun Tower is a rocket ship, it's just nice to see this like barely peeking through.
Hmm.
Um,
For sure.
so like that was fun.
So the Archon, who's really his boss, I guess, for lack of a better word,
Yeah.
tells, I want you to come to this costume party, come as a torturer, but don't bring your sword or any weapons. And I've got a job for you. And the job is this woman called, what's her name? Siri.
Syriaca, yeah.
Yeah. So she is a member of this class of people, or well, no, she's not a Pellerine, but she's dressed as one, correct?
She's dressed as one. She had been one, if I recall it correctly. She was like a novitiate, and then got out of it, presumably because she fell in love. You know, I think there might have been something else to that story.
Yeah.
So I should say too that I had reread these, I think around September, because Jordan and I were talking about them. I haven't reread them because I was like too close together. But so if I'm a little fuzzier, especially as we get further in, you know, that is sort of with the territory. But yeah, so Severian like strikes a conversation with her, right? And they're talking about some really cool deep lore stuff, right? With
Right.
like the old Kings of Earth and the machines. This is probably one of my favorite digressions really in the whole series. Just I love this sort of stuff. And they're sort of like, you know, they're hooking up, and he doesn't realize yet that she's the person he's here to kill. But you know, after they're done with the story, the Archon, what's his name, Adviasis, he comes along, and he's like, "Oh, you found her, great, right?" And there's this sort of jump cut,
Right.
and it's another one of those sort of like jarring transitions that we kind of got with the beginning of Claw, but it happens a few chapters in, because then he's suddenly on the run, right? And we have to like work backwards to realize that he has let her go.
Yeah,
You know,
I sort of got the sense as I was reading it that she was probably the client in this case, as it were, because I didn't see any other reason she would have been introduced in this way or become an immediate love interest, as all women in this story seem to be.
yeah, because he's, you know, completely honest, right? You know, no man has ever been more honest and direct, particularly about his relationships, than
Yeah.
Severian. Yeah, but it's also probably the case that like she knew, right? And she figured that if she, you know, buttered him up a little bit, that you know, she could maybe get away with it, which indeed happens.
So it's interesting in the companion book. It says this is an echo back to 1001 Arabian Nights, because there's a character in that
Yeah.
whose name I can't pronounce.
Sherazade.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Which I did look up a little bit, and I sort of remember the story now from somewhere, but I need to read 1001 Arabian Nights as well. But the idea is that this emperor was cheated on, and so each day he took a new virgin and killed the virgin at the end of the day. She was supposed to be next on the chopping block, and instead she did a series of stories, and he kept her alive to figure out what the stories were. So this is supposed to be an echo to that, which makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. I did not pick that up actually. So that is very good catch on Andre Driussi's part. Forget
Yeah.
this is not his first name; it's hyphenated. But no, totally right. That's a good catch. So cool.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. It's not immediately clear to me why she's supposed to die. She obviously cheated on her husband. Is the husband supposed to be a good friend of the Archon, or what's the?
I believe that's right. I think it's a combination of something like that, or it's just sort of a public embarrassment, and this needs to get dealt
Got it.
with.
Okay.
I may be misremembering, but my understanding is that in Thrax, as in the House Absolute, right, there's this sort of like tension between factions in politics because
Uh-huh.
of the war. And I think that Abdias is sort of like losing some support too, and he like really needs to like get it locked down. Like this is getting out of hand, and things are tight anyway. So we're sort of progressing. The other thing that needs to be said, right, is that the Thrax is on the other side of the Pampas, so we're probably in like northern Argentina, like verging into the Guays, and I can't remember which one's closer, and into, because we're heading towards like Peru, right, and
Uh-huh.
we're gonna go from there sort of up into Colombia, basically. And
Okay.
so we're much further north, and we're much closer to the Askians, and we're much closer to the front.
Right.
So things are getting a little bit more tense, and what we need to keep in mind is that sort of the overarching sort of thematic plot to this story is about a young man going to war. Now,
Mhm.
Severian is still not realizing that's really where he's going, right? He's sort of on his way. But
Yeah.
that was sort of the kernel that got the story started back when it was just a novella.
Yeah.
It was about, it was about this movement towards war, and so that's still happening,
Mhm.
and it's in the background. So we've got that. We've also got, I think the salamander stuff happens before Syriaca too, right? Or is it
That's after. That's on
slightly
his way.
after? Okay.
That's after he releases her, which is kind of an echo and callback to Thecla, and
Yes, of course.
and then so he knows he has to leave because he didn't obey his commands. So he's got to get out of the city. So he's headed back to Dorcas, if I remember the timeline right, to
Uh,
basically warn her and tell her, I'm
Goodbye.
leaving, so you can leave too, or whatever. And yeah, the salamander comes in. So that's a creature of Hethor.
Yes.
And I need to I guess I need to I look back a little bit. I need to brush up on Heather's deal, I guess. We probably talked about it in the first two books because I know he's a character in the first two books, but I don't immediately remember what his goals and his plans are, why he's trying to stop what
Okay.
he's trying to do.
So Hethor was a spaceman, right? Like he was on a ship, sort of like Jonas was.
Uh-huh.
Possibly even the same one if some of the stuff we learn in Earth is to be believed.
Okay.
But he has these mirrors that are sort of like the mirrors Jonas left by which he brings these creatures to Earth.
Okay.
Uh, and that's sort of where they're coming from. It's one of those details I was always a little fuzzier on myself. But
Uh-huh.
regardless of how they're getting there, he has these creatures at his command, right? And he is using them to stop Severian because he's in love with Agia. Um, and so Agia talks about this old sailor that she like goes to see sometimes,
Mhm.
to get money because they're so poor. That's Hethor, and he's
Okay.
quite besotted with her, and she's using him. In this case, she's using him
Of
for
course.
revenge. So Hethor is an extension of Agia's malign influence on the plot. He is quite separately, one of those people who's also fascinated with Severian because he's an executioner, right? And
Mhm.
he's like, ooh, blood, murder, cool. Which like those people totally exist, right?
Yeah.
Like serial killers have fan clubs, right? And executioners too, right? By extension, there's just this sort of macabre fascination that
Yep.
people have. So he's both got this attraction to Severian as murderer, and this infatuation with Agia. So there's this weird sort of like it's almost love triangle, really, in a sense going on here. But he's trying to get Severian so that Agia will marry him finally,
Gotcha.
basically,
Okay.
and so he's been following, I mean, much the same way that Gollum follows the Fellowship, right?
Gotcha.
And has been he was behind the noctuals in book 2, for example.
Yep.
And so that will sort of continue.
Okay.
Yeah, so
It's
basically that's the deal.
Thanks. That clears things up. That's helpful. It's interesting to see Dorcas. Her memories are starting to return, which would be horrifying to remember your death and your life before it, and everything that led up to it, and maybe being dead. Who knows? So she's got these memories flooding back to her, and she basically barfs up the leaded weight that held her down, which I'm reading that. I'm like, man, not sparing any details here. This is interesting.
Yeah, it is a lot to take in, and of course she kind of doesn't, right? She kind of has this. It's not quite a psychotic break, but she's like, I have to go. Like, I can't be with you. I need to go home. I need to figure out like all of this stuff.
Right.
And so and she's also started to chafe, right, as well, at the idea of being with the headsman, right.
Yeah.
All the other women in town are sort of looking at her askance. They're not married either, which is like probably an element of this as well. And she's starting to feel less and less like she belongs in Severian's life,
Mhm.
and like he's a bad guy, right, because he kills people and all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And she doesn't want him to be that, but like that's his job, and there's a lot of friction there. And so this all comes to a head when Severian is also probably part of the reason he doesn't kill Syriaca, right? Is because it's not who Dorcas wants him to be, and so it's not
Right.
really who he wants to be, because he's constantly asking this question about whether or not he's a good person,
Mhm.
and he knows the answer is no, right? But he still wants to be. And I think I can't remember which book he eventually says it explicitly that he's a bad man who wants to be good.
Mhm.
But he's done a lot of horrible things, right?
Sure.
Obviously, he killed Morwenna, who he knew was innocent. He still did it, and then he was happy about how he pulled it off. He raped Jolenta,
Mhm.
and kind of not quite in front of Dorcas, but like in front of Dorcas, right? And all of this stuff, and this is sort of a breaking point for him, right? It's like killing Syriaca is to make peace with the darker parts of himself, which require that he take his place in society. So it's tied into this whole complex of questions he's asked himself about whether or not he's a rebel or a servant of the autarch.
Mhm.
And that question's still not fully resolved, right? Because he
Right.
also knows that like Votalist is kind of gross now, right? Um, so all this is sort of welling up in this moment, right? And because it's Gene Wolfe, like none of that's on the page, right? So the first time I read this book, I was listening to it, I like totally didn't get this. Like I must have like spaced out for a second, because I didn't get that Syriaca was the person he was supposed to come kill the first time. I just knew he was leaving, and like my brain was just like, oh, okay, like whatever, like I'm just gonna move on, like I'll catch up and reread. It's fine. So I distinctly remember like not getting this, and then I went back and read it the second time, like, oh wait, okay, because I think I basically turned right back around and went through it the first time I
Yeah.
read this book, because like I knew the reputation, and I'm like, look, we should just like get the framework, and then we'll try again later,
For sure.
because I'm like a big fan of rereading. That's mostly what I do. I reread Lord of the Rings like once a year, right? So I was like, well, we're just gonna add this to the rotation; it'll be fine. Um, so I didn't get it, and I was like, that's fine, we'll catch it. But I like totally slipped by me the first time. But that's because Gene has this tendency to hide these very big things sort of off the page.
100%.
And this is what
Yeah.
separates him from a lot of writers is forget show don't tell. It's like, infer don't show even.
Right.
Um and that, because it's Severian writing, comes across as very earnest, right? This is like totally like how someone would actually write about this, because he's not gonna necessarily bear all of this sort of dysfunction. Like probably like, how do you write about like this complex of feelings? Like it's very hard to do. And so it's one of those places, you know, we talked about Gene and like his war stories where it's easiest to just not say it, right?
Hmm.
And and this is why I talk about him being like this, you know, probably science fiction supreme craftsman, because he knows what to leave off the page, and that's something that most writers, myself included, like don't have a really good handle on. You know, I just think it's so cool that like all this character work is it's totally there, but like it's like 1% there, but like it's
Hmm.
all very deliberate, and you know you it's left to the reader to make the other 99% of deductions, I think.
Yeah, it's hard sometimes because there'll be a small detail that I won't have understood until like 5 chapters later, which is in stark contrast to many newer authors I read that basically put "Hey, stupid, look at this" in their writing.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they have no confidence in me as a reader. So it's an interesting difference in that style, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's one of those things I think, especially with like the current crop of writers, the tendency has been to like be more and more explicit.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know if that's like a generational thing or if it's just a skill thing even.
Sure.
But there has been that kind of change, and you see this reflected too in like how long the books have become.
Yeah.
Often books are long not because a lot is happening, but because the density is just lower.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot more fat or just a lot more air for like things to breathe.
Yeah.
And you know, because it's cool, right? In the same way that like Lord of the Rings could have been Wheel of Time sized, and like
Hmm.
Tolkien
Easily.
would have been happy, I would have been happy, everyone would have been happy. The fact that it is denser,
Hmm.
you know, is sort of a boon, right? Because these books are very small. They're like 100, maybe 110,000 words long. And there is absolutely as much going on in, you know, the whole book of The New Sun as there is in Wheel of Time, right? Just in terms of like sheer length, like of just stuff covered. It's just covered, much more precisely. There's this old adage, right? My dad is fond of repeating that like any idiot can build a bridge, but it takes an engineer to build a bridge that can just barely stand. And
Yeah.
of course, Gene was an engineer, and I think that is, you know, reflected in his approach to sort of storytelling on kind of a macro level, because there really is. There's not. I've said this like a billion times. There's not any wasted components, and that's because he knows what to offload on the reader. Because
Mhm.
like it's you guys who really tell the story. You're taking,
Right.
you know, you're taking what the writer puts on the page, and you're imagining all the stuff that's not said. And that is and Gene knows, you know, that his readers are, you know, capable of, you know, doing a lot more than maybe other writers know they read or think their readers are capable of.
For
So,
sure. Cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about this next. So, a couple things I want to talk about. One is Little Severian.
oh yeah.
So, probably just a me thing, but is Little Severian a real person, or is this just something in his mind?
Oh, that's an
Is he
interesting
just
question.
imagining Little Severian? It's again probably just a me thing, probably no basis in reality. But it's very weird to me that he just happens upon a family who happens to have a son who happens to have his same name. That just
Yeah, no. So I think we can conclude that he's a real person. Although that is a good question, right? Because there are basically no witnesses to this family ever
correct.
existing, right? And I don't believe you're the first to ask this question,
Okay.
especially because of how he meets his end, right? You know, there's no like how who's going to corroborate any of this, right?
Correct.
Obviously, Agia kind of, you know, Agia is there, so there's at least something. But I don't know that we have any reason to suppose that they don't exist at all.
Okay.
What I do, what I can't tell you all of this yet because we've got to read one more book.
Yeah.
Um, but what this does tell us, right, is something about the naming conventions,
Uh-huh.
because they, you know, they ask. I can't remember if it's the mother or the sister.
Yeah.
Asks
Casdo and Sevra, I
I
think.
can't remember which one of them it is asks if he has a sister, because the fact that his name is Severian and not, you know, maybe Severus
Hmm.
suggests that he is not the first child, right? And so there's this question of Severian's family, who are actually in the story,
Oh, okay.
uh, if you know where to look, and it gets spelled out a bit more, obviously.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, but um, but it's it's to get you thinking about this question.
Okay.
more than it is, I think, anything else. Um, so that's just sort of something to keep an eye on. But I do broadly think they exist because um, for the same reason that, like, you kind of have to assume a lot of this is happening, because if it isn't, you're already reading a story that we know as readers like didn't happen. So, like, what's the point in
Right.
telling us about an imaginary thing that is imaginary?
Right.
Obviously there's some of that going on, but I tend to think that, like Dr. Talos, Severian lies less than we believe,
Uh-huh.
and or would like to believe. So, like, if you've listened to Alzabo Soup, they suppose that Severian forged the orders for Thekla's execution out of spite when she called him, a nice boy. I
Mm-hmm.
don't. I think that's just complete nonsense with respect to those guys. I
Yeah.
think they are way too cynical about this sort of thing, to
Gotcha.
to give that credence. So in the same way, I think that the family, like, kind of has to exist.
I thought it was cool him being a dad for a
Yeah.
while. I just I don't know. Some part of me thought the family really existed, but the boy perhaps was his projection of some kind, but I don't know.
Yeah,
Probably.
well, he's certainly projecting onto him, and it gets kind of weird kind of fast, right? Like, he's like, like this, like, you're my son now, right? And part of that is like, well, under the circumstances, like, what choice does any of them have? Either of them have. But on the other hand, it comes off very aggressive is not quite the right word, but it's very striking. How strong the language is and how quickly.
Mhm.
Part of that is the style, right? But part of it is still, I think, quite surprising. And then they do spend a reasonable chunk of this book together too. So we do see Severian, trying to be a better person, sort of relative to this kid that he's taken under his wing, which is also nice, right? Like, it's sort of a bit of a different facet of the man, and it's
Yeah.
part of this journey, right, of him trying to better himself,
Yep.
which is
The
cool.
kind of leading up to that, we of course have an Alzabo who's attacking the family. We've got sort of a Little Red Riding Hood type of situation where the wolf is trying to get in the house, which was cool. Um, I thought it was, and I could be remembering wrong, but it sounded like in terms of scale, they were saying like a human head is basically the size of an apple to this beast, which is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, it's
So
huge.
that's a big beast that's going after this family, and it's horrifying to know like the thing has already killed the dad and the daughter, and it's the dad's voice that's trying to get in the house, and little Severian actually lets him in, recognizing the dad's voice. So that just the whole concept of the Alzabo is just absolutely horrifying to me. uh,
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's so good. So when I said, I think the last episode, that this is my
yeah,
favorite book, this is one of those sequences. There
yeah,
are there are three chunks of this book in particular. Really
mhm,
four if you count Syriaca's robot story, because it's just so
yeah,
cool. That set it apart. And this is honestly, like, my third favorite. Like, as cool as it is, I like Typhon, and I like the fight at Boldender's castle. Those
yeah,
are like peak New Sun for me. But this section, dude, it's just so good, right? There's not a lot, like it's very obvious what's going on. Like,
mhm,
it's not obscure, it's not confusing the way some of these passages are. It's just like pure, like, if you like this, you're gonna love Dying Earth, because it's a lot of this sort of energy.
yeah,
And so you got this cool alien monster, right? It's doing this weird, things is very horrifying. And it's just very clear action the whole time. And you've also got the zoanthropes too, right? Who sort
yeah,
of are in the background of this. You got it gets very Planet of the Apes very quickly again, right? And it's just so much fun. Because it is, yeah, it's just nakedly horrific. It's uncomplicated. It's kind of a nice breather after sort of how involuted and reflective a lot of the first half of the book is,
yeah,
with all the personal drama and the politics. It's just like hits the gas, and really, Sword doesn't really let up after this point, right? It's
yeah,
this,
it
it's the
was,
sorcerers, it's Typhon, there's a little bit of a break, and then it's Lake Diaterna, and it's just, it's for this reason that I love this book.
it was
Um,
great.
yeah,
Um, I'm glad you mentioned the zoanthropes. So I like how he's basically explaining to little Severian what these things are. So they were men, and they decided they didn't want to be men anymore. So they're basically just instinctual animals that happen to be in men's bodies. So
Yeah.
something has happened to their rationality and their reason to, I don't know if they did it to themselves or someone did this to them, but it's a very, again, kind of horrifying concept of what
Yeah.
it'd be like. There's a similar thing that Robin Hobb does in some of her stories, and those are called Forged Ones, where it's basically taking away their sense of being human, I guess. So it's a cool concept I really like.
Yeah, they're just like slightly more sophisticated chimps at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think it does say that like a lot of them choose it for themselves. It's like a kind of suicide,
Yeah.
but it's like a weird like sort of like hippie mountain man form of suicide. Of like if I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die as an animal.
Yeah.
That'll be the way to go. And so they provide this sort of additional threat to the family as they're trying to get away from the Alzabo. It just sort of adds this extra layer of texture to the horror of the whole situation, right? Because it's there's a passage in this bit, I think it's in this bit, where Severian talks about how men who like to go into the mountains and be alone do so that they can play the role of man, like they're not Stephen
Right.
anymore, they're just man.
Right.
And this is sort of a I think reflection of that idea, right? Because these people have literally stripped away their sort of individual identities, their sort of their higher faculties to just become man, but like not in the way exactly that Severian means, right? Because he's still talking about being above nature in a sense, right? But these guys have become a part of it, so it's sort of like that thought has gone wrong
Mm-hmm.
in some way. But it does signal this transition because Severian's about to spend a huge chunk of this book completely alone, or almost completely alone. And
Sure.
in that capacity, he's a little bit less than a person, because this is something that's like really hard as a writer. If you put a character like literally by themselves for an extended period of time, it's really hard to write, and that's kind of reflective of the fact that it's really hard to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
Because people are really humanized by other people, right? And these guys are sort of the symbolic extreme edge of that. And as we're going sort of off the map, in a sense, of course we run into them, right? That's where they would be. So,
Yep.
and that's of course where you'd find Alzabos too, is the edge of the map. So,
Yep. It was pretty heartbreaking. I don't remember the exact phrasing, but at one point, little Severian says, "Did you help my mother, or did you do everything you could to help my family?" And the answer isn't no, but it's basically no. It was, I was too afraid, and he said it in the best way he knew how. I involved myself as soon as I thought I could, or whatever it was. Like, that's just a heartbreaking passage. As he's trying to be a father to this kid, he's at the same time telling him, "I couldn't save your family." So
yeah, no, it's
spoke
it's
to me.
it's rough. Kavsdo's fate in particular is just it's really harrowing. It is. You're definitely not in Kansas anymore, or Thrax, as the case may be. Not that Thrax was a walk in the park either.
Yeah.
Um, but there is this, it's another step sort of away from home, away from the tower, towards sort of that ultimate other world that is war, right?
Yeah.
And he's sort of getting there by stages and fits and starts and accidents. So
Cool. All right. So speaking of Severian being a dad, let's do story time.
oh boy.
Now, so now it's time of the tale of the boy called Frog. And okay, so I don't know about any of these references really, but I know we've got Romulus and Remus. I know we've got Jungle Book. I actually picked up on some of the Native American hints,
Interesting.
even before they said Squanto. Like, it just felt like a Native American traditional story. And I had forgotten that you told me Romulus and Remus was in this thing, so I wasn't even thinking about that. So as I was reading it, I was like, well, this has to come from some Native American tradition. And he says Squanto at the end of the thing, which obviously was the Native American at the first Thanksgiving. So that is kind of a cool reference. And there's apparently one more that I've never read or heard of. It's Harlan Ellison's What is it? Repent Harlequin. You ever
Oh
heard of
yeah,
that?
I've read that.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a science fiction like literature course in high school because I went to one of those weird magnet schools, and that
Uh-huh.
was actually assigned.
Okay.
Yeah, it's sort of like a weird it's like a weird little dystopian story. Because it's Repent Harlequin said the TikTok man, right? And it's about this world where like everything is like very sort of regimented
Mhm.
and the Harlequin is this like chaotic figure, right, who is trying to sort of break that order.
Okay.
That's basically all I really remember about it. Except I think that's the story that has this like really like long run-on sentence paragraph about jelly beans, if I remember correctly, because it's like
Fair
it's
enough.
very silly. It's like very Roald Dahl. It's yeah, it's sort of a goofy little story, but. And I can't tell you for the life of me because I didn't even think about it how it would relate to the boy called Frog. Because to be honest with you, this is the story that I like remember the most fuzzily, right?
Yeah.
Because student and his son sort of makes his impact on you because it's like the first one, right? And
Right.
it's like really really cool. This one is also really cool, and I should like it better because it's it's Romulus and Remus, it's Kipling, and Kipling
Uh-huh.
is awesome. But for some reason, it's one of those that sort of doesn't stick in there very well. But what this story also does that's worth mentioning is it kind of gives us an in-universe explanation for the origins of Typhon, because it is also about the last monarch before the autarky,
I got
and who is this sort of great figure who was trying to rebuild the galactic empire that fell apart.
you. Hmm.
And so when you talk about like an island beyond the shores of Earth, right, that's a colony world, right?
Gotcha.
And so there's some stuff wrapped up in there as well that's not just repackaging myths from our history, but is repackaging history from Severian's history.
Got it.
Um, and so that's wrapped up in there too, which is sort of my big takeaway from the story, because Typhon is basically my favorite character that is in Severian.
Oh, cool.
He is well, he's so evil, but he's just great. He's literally Satan, right?
Well, I
So
wish you'd been able to spend more time with him then.
yeah, yeah,
Maybe there's more coming.
yeah.
But yeah, I definitely got the Satan callbacks because we have basically, and this is jumping ahead, but we
Yeah,
have
sorry.
basically this. No, that's okay. It doesn't need to be linear. I don't think linearly either. But we have basically the scene of Jesus's being taken to the mount, and you can have all this by Satan. So,
Yeah. Oh, literally. Yeah. No.
it's
Well, all of it, right? He tempts him with food as well, which
yeah.
is fitting because it is Lent, of course. So it's happening right now, metaphysically. So that's we got here at the right time. But yeah, no, he's a satanic figure, but he's also Romulus in a sense.
Mhm.
He also is possibly the guy who put the library together. I don't know that we have enough clues to like totally get there, but there is this, in Syriaca's story, it talks about this, ruler of Earth who wanted to collect all the knowledge, in order to do what needed to be done. It's possible it was Emar or one of the earlier Altarchs, but
Okay.
I think there's enough to suggest it could be Typhon. I'm sure someone who knows more about this will correct me, but
And this is the library that's at the Citadel. That's
yeah,
correct.
yeah,
Okay.
because that also is in the House Absolute, and yeah,
Mhm.
the library, yeah, because it's also the library clearly from Syriaca's story, right? It's literally that library. Um, so there's a lot of the pieces in this book sort of fit together. I mean, they all fit together, right? But there's a lot of stuff that like within Sword, kind of fits back together like this. Um,
And the
yeah,
library is supposed to be a callback to something like the Library of Alexandria, correct?
in
Or is
part,
it
yes,
completely?
and in part two, there's a Jorge Luis Borges story. I think it's called the Library of Babel. That is about a
Hmm, okay.
sort of like a fictional library that's infinite, and it contains every possible book. So most of the books are gibberish because it's
Uh-huh.
permutations and combinations of letters.
Okay.
So it's this theoretically like infinite library, which is why like the library seems to have kind of a TARDIS thing going on, where like how is it in House Absolute and also in the city, and we don't get a clear answer, right? But like Rudisind was both in the Citadel and in the House Absolute, the painter, right? And he seems to not be aware of that fact, right? He's just like, I'm in where I'm supposed to be. What are you talking about? You journeyed for days? I don't know. Um, so uh, so there's a lot of connective sort of tissue back to that
Cool.
as well. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll talk Typhon for sure. But
But
first,
yeah. Sorry, I got us ahead.
no, no,
Yeah.
no apologies. This is fun. First, I want to talk about the Circle of Sorcerers. So, um, they kidnap the kid. They kidnap little Severian, and basically say, if you want him back, you need to have a sorcery duel. They tell Big Severian this. So, this sequence is challenging for me. So, they are practicing real magic. Is that what we're
It
supposed to
sure
take away from
seems
this?
like it. We're not. This is probably the one place where it's like, are they? I don't know. Because boy does it seem like it. Yes. I am not aware of a but actually explanation for this.
Okay.
Um, I mean, they could be like genetically, enhanced at some point in the past to have telepathic powers or something. But boy, yeah, it looks like magic to me. And I love it because it's like this very Johnny Quest sequence, right? They're in the jungle and they're all like painted funny, and it's very like Scooby Doo and the Witch Doctor. It's great. Uh, and of course, Hethor shows up too, right? So
Right.
you got to deal with that again.
Yeah, some type of what is it? I wrote it down. And I can't read, blob like slug.
Oh yeah, it's like the Blob. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
That's the creature that he's summoned to disrupt this whole sequence, basically.
yeah.
Um,
Um, Yeah, no. So as far as I can tell, man, it's a real wizard duel.
okay.
And fortunately, Severian's pretty resourceful,
Hmm.
so he managed, and Hethor ruins everything. So they managed to sort of comedy of errors their way out of this one. But it's yeah, as far as I know, it's real magic. So
And I
eh,
think at some point, it was alluded to or mentioned that little Severian calling Big Severian father somehow either strengthened his magic or lessened the sorcerer's magic. If I
I
understood
think
that.
I think that's right. Yeah, they basically have like a contest of wills, right? And having little Severian sort of faith, love, whatever in him helps support Big Severian in
Mhm.
in that moment, right? Which is like pretty cool, right? Like
Yeah.
that's a pretty sweet little moment. And
Yep.
it's continuing to this sort of journey that Severian is going through towards being not a piece of shit. So he because he has someone to fight for, right? And it's not because it's not for sexual reasons. So
which
he's
which I thought was weird. He explicitly stated at one point.
oh yeah, sure.
Why was why was that necessary to say? I didn't quite. I'm reading it.
I think in part probably because there is a lot of the like more elite characters, right? Baldanders, for instance, it is implied that that he is homosexual. And like it just may be like that's like an elite thing to do, and he's writing maybe he's writing for an elite audience at the House Absolute. That's maybe
Okay.
his sort of like core demographic, and maybe he's saying like I'm not one of those lords, right? And maybe I don't, maybe it's sort of an artifact of its time thing too. I
Mhm.
don't know. I find that little digression alarming as well.
Yeah.
It is a little uncomfortable.
That would have
Uh,
been the furthest thing from my mind. And then he said it. I'm like, maybe I should have been considering that.
yeah, I don't know. I don't think that anything happened in that department
Yeah.
personally,
I hope.
because that's like the one thing, and I don't think he's like hiding anything like that from. But I don't see any other clues, and I
Yeah.
feel like there would be more if Gene was trying to imply something like that. But
Yep.
it's hard to know definitively.
For
But
sure.
it is an alarming little digression, that's for sure.
Yeah.
That's part of what I was thinking of when I was talking about how like the language around Little Syrian it's very weird in a couple of
Hmm.
places.
Yep.
That's definitely probably the weirdest little section.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
All right. Well, moving past that, because I'm
yeah.
already got the icky feeling. So
Yep.
moving past
Yep. For sure.
that. So then, hopefully, none of us got super attached to little Severian because he touches a ring, and that's the end of him. So
Yeah, he falls for Space Satan, Hitler's trap, and
yeah,
yeah, he tries to steal some gold, and he's just gone, man, just totally blown to atoms.
the whole concept of this mountain, I guess, Mount Typhon, for lack of a better word, is really cool because it's basically a statue of him. Is that correct?
Yeah,
That's
basically the Andes have all been turned into statues of Earth's ancient rulers, right?
yeah.
I so this is actually one of the places where I have a question for Gene,
Uh,
So Typhon is the last pre-autarch monarch of Earth, right?
mhm.
And later in the series, we come back to the mountains, and I got reasons to believe that Mount Typhon is the first mountain that's carved, but
Oh,
it
okay.
doesn't seem to me. Well, this just I'm going to try and like not spoil this. I just want to raise the question because if
Mhm.
anyone out there has an answer to this question, I'd like to know. It seems to me like well, Typhon is the last monarch, right? And but the mountain Typhon is the first one carved. I don't think the autarchs have the capacity technologically, right? At least to the story, like they're a big step down from Typhon and the previous rulers of Earth and
Mhm.
Empire. So I don't know who carved the other mountains. This is something I haven't been able to figure out. But the idea is that the Andes have all been carved Mount Rushmore style in
Right.
the likeness of the emperors of Earth and Earth's
Mhm.
empire. And he was the last and the most vain, certainly, if not the greatest of the bunch. And so he's made this big mountain, and there's like also his like doomsday bunker, right? His wolf's den, because there's some Hitler vibes here too, right? In terms of like he's kind of crazy, and he's living in this bunker out in the middle of nowhere, blah blah blah. So he's got his little doomsday base there as well, and there are like Gundams basically that are like doing the work and also protecting the base. It's again like the like weird sci-fi elements are like so pronounced in this section, right? With the giant robots and
Yeah.
all of this stuff. It's just this is my favorite section.
Okay.
I think in Book of the New Sun period, right? The
Cool.
satanic element is something that I always go for in stories, right? It's just evil in its sort of most abstracted, rarefied kind of form, right? He's literally playing the role of Satan, and it's also where I think the Christian imagery in the book, because it's not an allegory, right? It's in the same sort of camp that like Lord of the Rings is in, where it's like
Right.
deeply informed by Wolfe's Catholicism, but it's not like C.S. Lewis, sort of making sure you get the point.
Right.
But this is as close as that gets, I think, to that, and it walks that line in a really nice way. Because it does. It's not just like you can have all the power in the world, right? It's save yourself, and also here's food. Like it's
Right.
all of the temptations,
Which he desperately
and
needed at that point, which makes sense.
desperately needed. Yeah, I mean he's like sucking on the snow like to get water. Like he's in a bad way,
And
and
he
like
even describes it as like the best tasting thing he's ever had in his life. Like that
yeah, yeah,
described the water. He was,
100%. It makes you think about like Mordor, right? And that
uh-huh.
oily stream they find, and there's a lot of that sort of that sort of feeling is in this passage. But I think really, if you can point to like a place really where Severian sort of turns and starts climbing upward, really for the rest of the story, I think it's here. I think this is his lowest point, sort of in general, right? He's made the same mistake. I'm like, obviously, you could say like sparing Thecla is a turn, right? Sparing Seriaka again is a turn, and
Sure.
he's moving in the right direction, but it's kind of like this a little bit. I feel like this is really his point because he has this confrontation with Satan, who is Space Hitler, right? And he says, "No, Space Hitler, I'm not going to join your party
Yeah.
and serve you. I'm going to do something else." And there's some other stuff going on here that we need to revisit when we talk about Earth,
Okay.
and we will. But I really do think this is sort of the point because They have a conversation too about the conciliator, who is Christ, sort of symbolically, in
Right.
the history of this world. And so all of this is sort of wrapped up in there, and man, it's just so neat, right? We've got this guy with two heads. He's, like Liam said in the comments, he's one of the few characters who's not named after a saint. So he's named after Typhon, who's the monster in Greek mythology. It's like the worst one. So he is Satan, right? Symbolically too. That's another way that's rearticulated.
So I had a couple questions.
Yeah.
So when the Severians come up to him initially, he's dead, it
Mhm.
seems. Is it well, he doesn't have the claw at that point, right? I can't remember if he had the claw in his possession at that point.
No, so he's not
He
in
doesn't have.
like cryostasis. He's like been dehydrated.
Mhm.
And there's something they do, maybe it's just their presence, activates the system that like rehydrates Typhon, like gets the blood
Okay.
going again.
So it's the
Um,
booby trap essentially that gets him back going again.
it was either that or them walking into the room and finding the dead guy with two heads in the chair, being like, "What's going on?" It's like, "Oh, the life support system's kicked in."
Gotcha. Okay.
It's something like that.
Okay.
That relates. I think Typhon says that outright, but it's hard sometimes to parse what these characters mean. So yeah, no, that's what it is. He was like beef jerky, and this made him beef again. So
And this guy, it wasn't just Earth, right? He was the ruler of many planets or many galaxies, or what's the span?
yeah, so there was a galactic empire, right? And mostly from like sort of exhaustion, like from lack of will, right? This idea that like a civilization has kind of like an energy to it, and when
Uh-huh.
that energy runs out, even if like all the chips are on the table, you have the most powerful military on the planet. If you just don't believe in America anymore, like America is gone,
Uh-huh.
right? Doesn't matter what you've got if the like quality of the people who are willing to support you is down, which is
Okay.
which is something to sort of think about. But like the will of but the will of the of mankind itself sort of died, and we just got old as a species.
Hmm.
And so the empire didn't fall because of war or aliens, although there's clearly like some of that out there. We've got Erebus and Abaya sort of on the fringes. Something's going on there.
Yeah.
But man just sort of like gave up the ghost. And Typhon was trying to recapture that spirit. So he's sort of like Vodalus, right? He is an earlier, more powerful, scarier Vodalus, right? If Vodalus is a Satanist, which he totally is symbolically,
Hmm.
then Typhon is the Satan he's trying to sort of emulate.
Okay.
It's to speak in terms of Reichs, right? Like Vodalus is like Fourth Reich, and Typhon is Space Hitler. And and he's sort of too dressed up a little bit in the trappings of like a South American dictator, right? You have this sort of vision of like his his generalissimos like kind of around him and stuff like that, and so there's some of that imagery as well. So yeah, no, he did rule some other planets. It's not clear how many, like, because he was a sort of an attempted reconquest. He wasn't like the Trajan or the Augustus. He was more like the Constantine
Fair.
or or the Justinian even. So
And he basically worked with scientists to figure out a way to extend his life, and that's why he has. So it's let me make sure I have this correct. It's his head and brain grafted onto Piatin, correct?
exactly, yeah. So he found this, big, beefy slave man,
Uh,
and it had his head attached because he, quite correctly, I think this is a really interesting point. Like he wanted to keep his face because his face was his reputation. That was what his subjects feared. That was what they listened to. He didn't want that changing. He didn't want his voice changing. He wanted to still recognizably be himself. And like maybe technology by his day like wasn't at the point where cloning was really on the table,
mhm.
or like maybe there's just not a way to like move his mind in a way that would have satisfied him, right? Because in my own work, right, characters like Karn Sagara, for example, like
Uh-huh.
it's not really the same Karn anymore, right? Like it's a new person, but Karn is like it's enough me that it's fine, right? Like it, whatever, right? But Typhon's like, no, it's got to literally be me, man. So he grafts his head on. So the person is also worth noting that it's during Typhon's reign that they realize the sun is going out.
Right.
Right. So he goes back to that problem. That problem goes back. So the sun has been dying literally as long as there have been autarchs. So this has been going on for thousands of years.
Okay. Makes sense.
We get a little bit of sense of the time scale from this episode too.
So we get the sense, or at least I got the sense, that Paladin wanted to die. Like he was afraid of being basically the vehicle for this dude. And I think he was happy when he got stabbed in the face, basically, because that ended his existence. So that's how Severian takes him out, essentially.
So the autonomic nervous system is still running off of Paladin's brain. Typhon hasn't quite sort of taken over the body yet. So even though Paladin's been mostly choked out by Typhon's parasitism, he's there enough to whisper mouth kill me, right? And that takes Typhon down because his body was taken from him by Space Hitler. And
horrifying. I like the horror elements in this book. It's
scary stuff, right? He's sort of trapped, so he knocks him out, and like you said, like he's barely in the book, right? But you'll find like in 6 months, you're thinking about this book. These are chapters that they're gonna still be rattling around. It doesn't take a long time to really leave an impression, right? Like I was telling my friend a little while ago, like Darth Vader's in like 7 minutes of A New Hope, right? And like they are the best 7 minutes, right? So it doesn't take too much, right, to really leave an impression. And Typhon, doesn't overstay his welcome, I guess. So
he's also in like 30 seconds of Rogue One, and I consider that a great movie because of that 30 seconds.
Because of that 30 seconds.
What are you gonna do? Yeah,
100%. Yeah, exactly. I'm on the same page.
All right. So we then have sort of this harrowing sequence where Severian's traveling down the mountain by himself with nothing but his regrets and thoughts of, his kid got killed that he just had made the acquaintance of. I think we start to see some first thoughts of suicide at that point, although it's more pronounced later, which we'll get to. So he's making his way back down, and then so he runs into this hetman and has dinner at his place, basically, and is relying on his title that he made up. He's calling himself a grandmaster, which is incorrect, and he's bullying this dude, and he finds a way in, and again falls in love with another woman named Pia, who is a servant. So once again, someone he just meets is the best and falls in love with her, which is crazy to me, but that is
it totally is.
What's that?
No, it totally is crazy. Although you see those people, right? Like they get out of like a 10-year relationship, and like the next day they're like, I gotta get back out there, man. So it's not like those guys don't exist, right?
Sure.
But it is a little bit like, man, like I don't know. Severian, calm down, bro. It's
he expresses love in a very strange way and has her be basically a food tester. So
that is true.
You're great. Why don't you test this food to make sure they didn't poison me?
Although it turns out they totally did. So his efforts to try and avoid that fail because they gave him mushrooms. And he ends up trapped and on his way to the the master of the castle at Lake Diaturna, which, if you have been doing the math, should we know who we're going to go meet. This is great. And they run into. I should have
thought this and totally blew by it. So I was as surprised as Severian somehow.
That's awesome.
Because I'm an idiot, and
I missed the Syriaca thing my first time, so no worries.
What was interesting to me, though, that whole sequence where he's hallucinating, and at first I'm like, "What the hell's going on?" I was so confused, and then I'm like, "Oh, because he was drugged." It took me I'm like, "Is this stuff really happening? The people are turning into beanstalks?" And I was all confused. And
no, this time it's not that deep, right? He's just tripping. Gotcha. Which is really, really funny. Yeah, I wanted to mention real briefly on the way. I
Yeah.
think it's on the way down the mountain before he gets to the village. Even I think this is where. Correct me if I'm wrong. There's a passage where he like looks back up at the mountains. Like I think I would have died if I came down that. Like he might have died again at one point actually and come back. And like not really been aware of it. This is something I think. I think it's the Alzabo Soup guys pointed out, at least in my awareness. I'm sure Andre Dragusi or somebody has pointed to it at some point.
Because the assumption is that he's special with or without the claw, right? Because he doesn't have it at this point. He's going back to the castle to retrieve it. Yeah. So the assumption is there's something unique and special about him above and beyond any talisman or anything that is part of that.
Yeah, because you'll recall, too, that he probably died in the first chapter of the book, too.
Right.
And then came back. And then there's he also brought Triscale, the dog, back as well.
Mm-hmm.
I always almost say tricycle because Jonathan Davis just couldn't say the word Triscale. Gets me every time.
Yeah.
But so he's tricycle to me.
Yeah.
It's like, that's his name. I don't believe you. Like, that's a weird Jonathan. What are you? Anyway, so yeah, we run into good old Dr. Talos and Baldanders, evil C-3PO, and Frankenstein. And everyone's getting nicknames this episode. I don't know what's going on.
I dig it. It's good.
We must be in a weird mood.
We also run into the alien guys, Ossipago, Barbados, and Famalimus or something.
Yeah, so they are all named after very obscure Roman gods. And they are all gods that have something to do with childbirth. Ossipago, I believe. Ossa, what am I saying? Has something to do with like making sure the baby's bones develop properly, right? Famalimus teaches them to speak, which is really cool. This Famalimus' dialogue is all in blank verse. It's all iambic pentameter. It doesn't rhyme, but like that's pretty cool. I always love it when writers do this. I think is it Rothfuss, one of the characters, speaks all in blank verse too. It's a neat little trick. It usually goes over even my head. Someone has to tell me. But so these are people, they don't have saint names, so they must be something else, and they are in fact aliens. And we learned they are not actually scary monsters, but they are quite shiny underneath the scary monster masks. But they also like live backwards in time. We got like a T.H. White's Merlin River Song kind of thing going on here, which is additional fun wrinkle that also got thrown into this book. And I love the image of just this like ramshackle medieval tower and like a UFO. Because it's straight up.
I totally missed until reading it's very clear. It talks about a ship that's hovering, and I totally just read right over it until I read the companion deal. And like, oh yeah, obviously that's
straight up a flying saucer. It's so good. Yep. Gene's like, I don't need to make up a cool like spaceship. We're doing the normal one. Which like only makes it better. I just love it. This whole, just like the optics of this whole section are just so neat, right? You have Frankenstein's castle, UFO, like eat your heart out, Hammer horror film fans,
So the alien dudes, they're in opposition to the current autarky, or they're in favor? Like
they're in favor of it, or rather, they are in favor of the project rather that the autarky is. This is something. I mean, this is sort of hard to explain. All right, but the autarky, without like giving too much away, but the autarky is trying to fix the new sun problem, right? And like actually like sort of revitalize humanity and give it like a new shot at something new, like to go through this whole Phoenix process and like become had the sort of the spirit of mankind be kind of young again, basically. Whereas as Vodalus is and Typhon as well are like turning to the past to try and recapture this past that like will never really be recaptured, right? Which is sort of trying to do the same thing. They're trying to like rekindle mankind's glory, but it's a question of how.
Right.
And so, and like whether or not it's possible, because down Vodalus's avenue, right, is actually only slavery to Abaya and Erebus, right? So down that path lies, demonic possession and really failure, right? But these aliens, Hierodules, right? Hierodule means sort of holy slave, right? And they are the good guys in a sense. If good guys is maybe too reductionist, but they
Yeah.
are they're on the project that is maybe let's say just like less horrible, right? It's not an easy road. Haha. But
And they're
you
called
know,
Cacagins also? Are those
yeah,
interchangeable
yeah.
terms? Or?
Kakachin, I believe, is a word that like the people of Earth use to refer to the aliens because they think they are these gross monsters. Because Kakajin means like misborn.
Okay.
It means like I think it's like bad gene or something.
Okay.
But something like that.
Gotcha.
Because they see, these like scary monsters. What they're really seeing are like mantises and like lamprey eels and stuff, right? But those are also masks because I don't know if it's because they'll show up again
Mhm.
briefly, but Barbados is a robot, right? Actually, like he's an alien robot. So underneath, and Famalimus is obviously this very sort of angelic looking kind of creature, and but
And none of them have anything to do with the Green Man, correct? It's a different type.
no, that's a different future. The Green Man is a different future organism. The Hyrule are from another place
Okay.
entirely. Yeah.
I figured
Um,
that later.
yeah, yeah. Um, so they also, I think they greet Severian as my lord, right?
Right.
So because they are aware of the future, they're kind of moving backwards through his life at least,
Hmm.
and and they are aware that he's going to become autarch. I think someone, I think it was Stewart, asked, "Is this how he becomes autarch?" I think that was in reference to like the Typhon episode.
Hmm.
Not quite. He becomes autarch a little bit later, but we're moving in that
Like
direction.
one
And
oh, I'm sorry.
oh no, we're moving in that direction. And this is the part where Severian kind of becomes aware that something like that's in his future. Because obviously, him as writer, he told us this in chapter one. He's going to be the
Right.
autarch, but this is the first time. This is sort of like Macbeth, right? Where you have these three fates, basically,
Okay.
right? Who are saying, hail Macbeth, Thane of whatever, you will be king hereafter. It's kind of got a little bit of that feel to it because you
Gotcha.
got these three figures who are kind of weird, right? Who are sort of presaging the future. So there's a little Greek, in there with like the fates, and obviously like the planet is named after one of the Norns, right? Or the Norse version of the fates, right? Earth is
Hmm.
is the past. So there's a little bit of that sort of resonating here, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
It's insane to me that there's only one book left. The book is only like 300 pages because it feels like there's still a lot of story to tell.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so part of that is that like Earth of the new sun was not supposed to exist, right? It was
Right.
like all supposed to be subtext, and Gene was like, "You figure it out." But they were like, "Gene, bro, we like really like. Could you help us figure it out? Can you write one more book, please?" They sold pretty well, man. Like
Yeah.
just explain it. So there are two books. It's
Yeah.
just that the book that Severian wrote for his courtiers on Earth ends after
Right.
Citadel, and Earth is the book that Severian never thought he was going to write and didn't intend to write. Um, and he'll tell you that in the book. He's like, I didn't want to write this.
I do
Basically,
love when Severian tells me things directly. That's
yeah,
always
it's nice, right? He's like, I don't even know who's going to read this. Technically, it's impossible for anybody to get their hands on it. So, like, why am I writing this? Like, okay, Gene, we get it. David Hartwell irritated you. Your editor bullied you into writing this book. So there's a little bit more room, and Earth is the longest, I think, by far. Actually,
oh, okay.
I think it's like 60% longer than any of the other ones. So we got a ways to go. And
Yeah.
I, of course, am like totally pro Earth of the New Sun. There are a lot of hardcore fans who are like, you don't need it; it's DLC. And I'm like, but like it's like really good DLC.
Yeah.
So I think it's great. So it's but yeah, it is wild to think like how much still has to happen.
Hmm.
Um and Citadel is pretty wild. So that'll be a fun conversation here in a month
Looking
or so.
forward to it. So, again, we get the reveal, I guess, but it feels like it's been revealed already, maybe, and I don't know. But Baldanders is the actual master. Talos is created to help him become more, I guess.
Yeah, get bigger.
Baldanders chucks the claw out, and then we have a bit of a sequence there. We have a fight between Baldanders and Severian, which is pretty cool.
Yeah,
Where
so neat.
Baldanders is using this mace and actually breaks my sword.
He
Terminus
does.
Est is
It's
broken.
it's it's always really cool when like the most painful death in a book is like not a person. It's like it's in this case it's the sword. It's like
Right.
but it was so neat. There's a Guy Gavriel K book where he like tears a mosaic down. I'm like, oh geez, that forget the characters. I'm just so sad. And so that hurts. But what's really but we also like learned from this episode, right? That the claw really isn't the thing, right? It's
Yeah.
and that's something that'll be made. We'll continue this question, right? But Severian is also clawless, so he's lost the sort of his sort of tools, and he's left really with nothing but like because like even his cloak. I think this is the point where he realizes his cloak has gone to just like normal black.
Mm-hmm.
Which is basically like a black hat, white hat change for him, right? He's gone from
It's
darker than black to
so much
regular.
with the color of Fuligen. I don't understand how
Uh,
something darker than black.
oh, sure. Have you seen those substances that like they absorb like 99% of light, so they're like you can't see the folds in them even. It's like some sort of like special like super black fabric that just doesn't,
Uh-huh.
yeah. Or at least that's the best we can do with it. But there are these things getting to the point where they're kind of affordable. I kind of want my own.
Okay.
Where you could be very invisible.
Leaf
Um,
color. Nice.
yeah, but my favorite color, Liam. Me too, man. Me too. But yeah. So the other thing that's worth mentioning too, right, is that the Hyrule are just like, yeah, you guys like figure it out.
Yeah.
Like it is a human affair, right? Like you duke out the future because Baldanders, in a sense, too, is another figure sort of in the votalist bucket who is
Mm-hmm.
because he's literally trying to become like Abaya, right? He's trying to become a demon.
And
Uh,
winds up in the water
yeah,
during his escape.
yeah. So he's in the same boat where he's not trying to recapture mankind's past glories. He's like all inward facing. It's all about him, right,
Mm-hmm.
and his immortality, right? Because he is so precious and special and a genius, and all of that should exist forever. Everything that matters is him, right?
Yeah.
And so like that is also he's also a Satanist symbolically in this way
Sure.
that Votalus is. But it's a different kind of pride, right? Like Votalus is kind of vainglorious. He wants to sort of be the great emperor for everyone. He's like this Bonaparte figure,
Mm-hmm.
and not so Baldanders. It's just all inward facing.
Yeah.
And it's sort of there's also a like science versus faith thing kind of going on. Although like Gene doesn't really like it's not that simple, right? Like Gene would never put those in contradistinction because he was both
Sure.
a man of faith and a scientist.
Right.
But there is this sense of like pure like it's like scientism, like the religion of believing in science, as
Right.
people say these days, versus something a little bit deeper because um Severian knows there's something weird going on, right? And sort of something sort of supernatural at this point. He doesn't understand it, but he feels it.
Uh-huh.
And of course the Hyrule make this a little. They got him thinking in these lanes a little bit too. So this is all sort of coming to a head as he has this final clash with another sort of Typhon pretender, right? This
Mm-hmm.
sort of demon in training, as it were.
Yep.
So
Yeah, that whole sequence was very cool. And then obviously post that, he's, heading down looking for the claw. And again, suicidal thoughts. He's like, well, I already chucked my sword in the river. I got nothing left. My kid's dead. I don't have anything to live for unless I find the claw. And as you said, it's found, but in a completely different form. The jewel around it is shattered, and it's literally a claw, if I understand. If I
yeah,
understand
yeah,
correctly.
yeah. It's just this little sort of like yeah. That's all he's got. And he's like, he's not even 100% sure that it's the same thing, but he like has to believe it is.
Right.
Um, and that's another thing too, right? Is that there's this belief element too. So he's in this weird spot. He's very, very fragile, very like not in a good state. But he freed the lake people, right? So he is a hero from Frankenstein. Got that done,
Right.
and he's off, north
So
on his way. So.
I don't remember. So where is Talos now? Where does he end up? I don't remember.
I can't. So he didn't Baldan. Did Baldander send him away, or no? I'm thinking of a little bit later. I don't really know at the end of this book. Just
Okay, that's fair.
if I remember correctly.
Okay.
I'm trying not to like get ahead because there's a little bit more.
Fair.
But,
I appreciate it.
Yeah,
It'll be interesting to see what happens from here because a little bit Severian's a shattered man at this point. So, and that's where I'm confused about there seeming to be a lot of story left. So I'm very anxious to get to Citadel because it seems like a strange leave at the end of this book. Not bad, but just strange.
So
didn't end up where I expected it to.
I think that's partially because he got the old Kingdoms of Death treatment on this book. It was supposed to be a trilogy, and I think it was 3 and 4 that got split into 2 volumes.
That's fair.
And I think it was for the same reason. I think it was paper cost. So got a little bit of that going on because this one does feel a bit sharpish there at the end in a way that Claw felt sharpish at the beginning. But there's a lot to go, and there's a lot that he will skip to, right? So particularly between the end of really the story he gives us and when he's writing, there's a bit of an elision. So we have that to look forward to. But because in the same way, right? A good book should leave you wishing there were 4 more of them. And I would read 4 more of these. I want the whole history of his 10, 20 years of ruling. I think that would be cool. I want the House Absolute court intrigue, but we don't get it. So, you'll and that's fine because it leads us to imagine we could live in that world in our heads a little bit. But we've still got Citadel ahead of us, and it is I already made the no easy road joke, so I won't do it again.
This series has done enough for me that I bought all of Long and Short Sun. I want to make sure. And
yeah.
I don't know if I'll do those exactly after, but it will be not too far from when I complete this.
Yeah, I really like Long Sun. I have not read Short Sun yet, but I really like Long Sun. It's I think I've said before, a much easier read and a much harder one, depending on how you count. But it's also very fun. So we'll look forward to that too.
Cool, my friend. Well, anything we didn't get to that you think is important to talk about? We didn't talk a ton about Aegea, which she was brought up in relation to Hethor.
She's still plugging along. Yeah.
It was weird that she was the one hiding in the house that he happened to come upon. That is very strange to me that happened. I don't.
Yeah, I guess there's not another house in the mountains, right? Had to go somewhere, right? But because you do get this impression it's pretty desolate. But she's also totally dogging his tracks, right? And they knew he was in Thrax. So they were she was watching from some, other house in the city and Hethor, it's time, send the salamander. I promise I love you. Go. So they might have followed him out, right? And she got ahead of him. But she's never far, right? Neither of them.
Never far, never rational, but that's okay.
Yeah, well, killed her brother / boyfriend. So she's pissed.
But again, it was all set up by it never would have happened if they would have just left him alone. So
it's totally her fault. That's true. they're like Team Rocket. They just really want that Pikachu. She just keeps showing up and they keep going their own ways. So
nice.
Oh man. But yeah, no, we're not done with her either, obviously.
Good stuff.
She'll be back.
Well, I appreciate you hanging with me and helping me unravel some of this stuff. And thanks for the audience being here. Appreciate everybody's comments. But I think we'll end it there. I think that's a good spot. So publication order always, my friends.
All right. Thanks for having me, man. See y'all.